to record. Y'all can hear me well. So we're at the GSOP P104, the life and work of a preacher evangelist. And today is March the 14th, 2023. Sometimes I forget to put that on when I put them on the YouTube. And so if I say it this way, then the person that starts it will know that's when it is. So we got some people go back and pick them up. Tonight we had gotten last week down to performing weddings, and we've already covered this, and not with Mika wasn't with us, but we covered this probably more in depth than we would tonight in dealing with that of marriage. And so, but the preacher is one that usually does most of the weddings in a congregation. And sometimes it's a former preacher, or maybe a preacher where people know elsewhere, and but the preacher should keep in mind that one simple but fundamental fact that marriage is an act of God, or is of God, Matthew 19, 1 through 6. Now, when I do counseling on marriage counseling, I have to talk to people, and I let them know. I said, before I do your ceremony, then you're going to sit down and talk with me. Plus, you got to go through it at least, I think it was 6 to 9 hours of counseling before I do the marriage. Because of no, and the first thing I talked to them about is marriage, and I said I'll give them one thing that I asked for them. I said I want you to go home this week and think all week, and I want you to come back and tell me in one word how to make your marriage a successful marriage, and you'll be surprised at that one word. The one word I always look for is commitment. In other words, you're committed to stay together until death. And so I explained that. Then I explained that the only reason for that of divorce would be for that of fornication, or if you may die, that you wouldn't be getting a divorce, but you'd be able to marry. So I try to do some of that, and then a lot of questions come up, and you answer those questions, and then I do some counseling in reference to responsibilities of the husband, responsibilities of the wife, and children involved in our day and time. Now, sometimes people come to you and they've already got a child or two. And so they, I bring that up also, and especially if, let's say the woman had a child from another man, they weren't married, and now she's marrying this fella, and maybe he had a child from another woman, they weren't married, so they got two children, but those children's got, two mamas and two daddies, if you don't look at it that way. They call it a mama and a stepmama or whatever. But the marriage is Hebrews 13:5 is honorable with when people enter in sacred contracts are free in God's sight to do so. It is a contract, and God is also in that contract. A lot of times I try to tell them, I said, there's three people. There's you, there's the husband, there's the wife, and there's God. God's got to be in your marriage, and he's going to be in your marriage whether you're a Christian or not, because you're being married according to what his laws say. Try to get that across to them. This is God's law. One man for one woman for life, except for death, or except for that of fornication. You have to explain what fornication is, because some people think just because they get their husband or wife watching pornography that that's fornication. That's not so. Fornication is the act of sexual relationship outside the marriage. That's what it gets down to. So there are marriage customs, and I was hoping that Jason would be on here, which are acceptable by God by respecting persons. The custom of having a wedding ceremony in a church building seems to add a measure of dignity to the wedding. Most people say, I want to have a church wedding. I want to have a church wedding. I have a church wedding. We have a church wedding. But in the state of Georgia, we'll get this down there, but I'm going to do it now. Well, let me wait. Maybe he'll come up and we can get this while he's with us. Number two, while the wedding is not a worship service, there are spiritual aspects to the wedding, and so that may be appropriately emphasized during a church wedding, quote church wedding. There are times when the preacher will be asked to officiate at home and private weddings, and I've had that to do where you can do them at both. I've gone to denominational buildings where a member of the church is marrying someone who's not a member of the church, and they wanted to have it in in the church of their building, their choice, especially when it's the wife, the bride, because usually the bride's parents pay for it, and so their parents are going to tell them where they're going to have the wedding most of the time. And sometimes things come up like that causes a lot of problem. I know when Lynn and I got married, I just got home from Vietnam, gone, and we got married 2 weeks after I got back. She married a stranger, and she'll tell you that. She married a thought she was marrying a boy, and she married a man. She said it's completely different after since he's gone over there. But her daddy made a comment, and I made a decision, and I wish I had never done that. After he's told me, she says, told her daddy that she wanted me to wear my uniform, and I get married in my army uniform, all with all my stuff on it. And he made this comment, he said, "We're going to see who's the boss is at the very beginning of this marriage before they get married." And and so I chose to buy a suit and wear a suit, and I have regretted that. I don't have anything hardly in my military outfit, so forth. Laws vary. This is what I was going to talk about, but Jason had a guy here. But laws vary with states as to one who may legally perform weddings. In some states, one must be licensed before he can legally officiate weddings. And the preacher should check with the state health department or with an attorney as to qualifications for performing weddings. Now, I was a preacher in Georgia, and I left Georgia. People in Dallas, Georgia, wanted me to come back and do the ceremony for their daughter. The daughter wanted me to come back. We'd gotten kind of close, family, and so I said, "Okay." Well, when I came back, she had already gone to the courthouse and everything else. I'd already told her I didn't need anything, but she had something drawn up and made me sign it. That I was a preacher and that type of thing, and I was living in the state of Alabama, and I have the right to give weddings in Georgia as long as Georgia didn't. She had all written up, so we signed all that stuff. I just did it for her purpose and so forth. But in the state of Georgia, you can even the elders can also officiate. Also, the deacons can officiate because they're officers in the church. That's what they would say. That's what it basically says. That you have to be a preacher or you can be an officer in the church and do ceremonies. And so, Mickey, you're from Kentucky. How is it up there? And you're going to be, wait this minute, here comes the Dustin.
I'm not really sure. I haven't been to many weddings or done any weddings. So.
Okay, so you don't know. We're talking about there, Jason. I know you just got here, but we were talking about the laws in the states of the what a preacher can do. The only thing I know to do is, like I said, in Georgia, you don't have to have a license and so forth, as long as you're a preacher. And a lot of these fellas, I'm going to tell you something. I was in a meeting with some veterans, and they said, "Well, I can marry people now." And somebody said, "Well, how can you do that?" He said, "Well, they had this course on on the advertising on Facebook, and I took it. So now I am an official ordained preacher." So they could do marriage ceremonies. But in the state of Georgia, you don't have to have any of that. And like I said, the elders can marry people. They're officers in the church, and also a deacon can do that. He's an officer in the church, and so they can actually perform wedding ceremonies. And so, but you need to check if you're in another state. The best thing to do is check. Probably if you know any other preacher in that state, you'd call and ask them. In Alabama, it's still the same way. If you're a preacher, on ceremony or an officer within the church, and that's what because we had some to do that over there. I've only done marriages in Georgia and Alabama. So. There are several problems that arise in that of the marriage ceremonies. And so, number one, should one perform ceremonies involving a Christian marrying a non-Christian? And basically, what I do, non-Christian that someone's marrying, I make them. What's the word make? I tell them, I said, well, I'll do the ceremony as long as you right now will promise me you got through with your vacation together, your what do you call it? Can't think of it right now. Going off your
honeymoon.
Honeymoon, yeah, I can think of it. The honeymoon. When you get off your honeymoon and get kind of things straightened out, that I come in and we have a Bible study. And I've never had one to turn me down. They said, "Okay, we'll do that." And I reminded them, even if the one of them was married and one of them was a member of the church, when they come, I said, "Well, you remember the promise that both of y'all made. Both of you made it, and even though your mate's not coming with you, this was a promise that was made." And usually, especially if it's the woman that's a member of the church, usually I have Bible study. That's it, right quick. You promised, therefore you are. Oh, and the same is true with a man to his wife. He said, "Promise this, Bobby did that we do this, and that's a promise that we make." So that's what I do, you know. But there are times when I've married people uh, that they marry outside the church, and I don't have Bible studies, but the majority of them, I would say 98% of mine have been where I ended up studying with. Should number two, should one officiate a ceremony involving divorced people? I had a strong thing about that. I did not marry people that had been married before, and I changed over the years. Especially the people that I knew that had the right to marry, because if they could prove that the person had committed fornication and therefore they had the proof of that, or they'd gone to court and they could have it in a divorce their paper and so forth, and I would do the ceremony. Uh, but I have married people that have not been members of the church, neither one of them, and one of them had been married, and I still do the same thing. I know it's not going to involve my uh, salvation if I marry them, and they've lied to me because I'm going to, according to the way they're telling me. I try to find out. And basically, I had a niece, and they want me to marry them, and I said no, because neither one of them had the right to marry. And in fact, he took her away from her husband. That was my niece. She wanted me to do her ceremony. I love her dearly, but I told her no. And plus, she'd already been married 2 or 3 times, so I wouldn't have done it anyway, even if her husband had committed adultery, fornication. But I just don't know. I don't do that. So, uh, that's the way I do. I mean, I ask about it, and if they can prove to me that they want me to do it as a person that's been married before, if they can prove to me that uh, their mate committed adultery and so forth. And yeah, sometimes you have some people come along that no fornication was involved. We just basically couldn't get along, and therefore we separated. And one of them has died in the meantime. You know? Is he or she free? Well, it seems to me that they are, because they're separated. They never did do anything. They just couldn't get along. They never remarried anybody else, and so death separates that. And so it's to this point of how God looks at separation. It's when I do a counseling that way, when people come to me and they're going to say, "Well, we're going to separate." I'm going to say, I always say, "Well, how are you going to solve the problems if you're not together?" I said, "I want you to explain to me, how can you solve your problem if you're not together? You got to be together." And I had a couple that way, and they drove all the way from the other side of Atlanta up here. And they came up, and we talked and talked. They had some problems, and we solved the problem. But the thing was, is that on their way home and on their way over, they talked about the things that we talked about. Therefore, they made the decision. They walked in one night, and, we was going to counsel them. They'd already made a decision, but they went through counseling anyway. Then they told. So that was their last night. But when you're talking to people that way and you're going to do the ceremonies, then you need to find out. Will one counsel with people prior to marriage? If so, what topic shall be discussed? And the first one, Mickey, if you want it, if you'll send me an email, I'll send you the stuff that I gave to Jim and to Jason in the last course. I have questionnaires and things of that sort. And so if you get down to that, your preacher there doesn't have any, I give them. I think I got some of mine from uh, Brother Clark, T.J. Clark. We have that book. That basically, if you buy the book, Rejoice, Weep or Rejoice and Weep, from Memphis School of Preaching, they have all that in there. And so all I did is copied it out and typed it up, made it bigger. And that's what I use. It's a qualification, it's not questions and everything about that they do before uh, uh, the ceremonies and things of that sort. And then also you have some about the ceremonies. And so all kinds of questions that you ask, and then you go over them with them. And basically, a person who doesn't have counseling credentials, or maybe the experience of that, they actually can do the counseling with those things that's in the back of that book. And all I would do if I were you is you can read them yourself. And I think I changed some of them, but they were very good. Brother Clark, I don't know if y'all know, he's retiring from Memphis School of Preaching, and but he is Brother T.J. Clark, not son either. And what topics shall be discussed? And I really discuss, and at times I've put this in my ceremony. I said, we will read Matthew 19, verses 1 through 9 at the ceremony. And I said, is it your understanding that the only way that this marriage could be be departed, or whatever word you use, separated, or could you have the right to involve this revelation because one has committed fornication? I used to ask that question and make them say yes in front of the whole congregation. I turned to the man and said, do you understand that? Yes. To the wife, to the bride, do you understand that? Yes. That way, if they ever have any problems, come back to me or anybody in that audience, especially if they're elders there, other members of the church that's going to visit with them, and says, well, now you said you understand. And so that's one of the things that we all talk about. One more elaborate weddings, and someone may be employed to direct the wedding procedure. Now, when you say that, I always tell people this. I said, you never know who you're going to do a ceremony for. And so I had this, somebody says, one of the members of the church called me, says, Bobby, says, a friend of mine wants to get married, and they're a good family. They have family members that are members of the church, and they're a good family. But he was in the military. He was in the White House when Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan was there, and but she's going to marry somebody that's already been married before, but they're divorced, and they say that he has the right reason to marry her. So I said, okay. And so I got them together, and I said, we're going to talk about this before I say I'm going to do the ceremony. You know? And so he proved that was that. So I did the ceremony, but some people, the family members of the church, was upset with me because I did the ceremony, and they thought I was doing it for the money. I said, ma'am, they didn't pay me. I told them they didn't owe me. I was just doing it because I wanted to set up a Bible study. But when I went to the wedding, they had cameras. I'm talking about the kind you push around. And they had 2 seats or 4 seats empty. And that was for former President Jimmy Carter and the President Ronald Reagan. They were invited to that wedding, but did not show up. Like it scared me to death. My heart was, when they told me, I said, I went by it, the tables where everybody would set up, it had their names on it. But he was some kind of officer there, that was in the military, in the army. I think he is in the army, and so you never know what's going to happen at those. And in these big weddings that way, they're going to have somebody direct the wedding, okay? They're going to pay somebody to direct the wedding. But sometimes, in some instances, the family would expect a preacher to direct the wedding and plan the entire ceremony during the rehearsal. The back of Brother Holland's book, also the back of that Reap and Rejoice book, from Memphis School of Preaching, they have examples of an example of funeral ceremony. That should be a marriage ceremony too. But they have one. They have one also for a funeral, and how they're supposed to go. A lot of times, funeral directors will, we've talked about that. If funeral directors, they have a certain way they do things, but yet sometimes the family doesn't want it that way. They want it their way, and therefore it would be left up to somebody in the family. If not the family, it'd be left up to the preachers to go and says, look, I know that y'all usually tell the friends to go to the auditorium before we go, the family goes. But because our family is big, we want our family. You can let everybody stay back here and have prayer back here, but we want you to let our family go first, so we can all sit in the same place, same area. That's happened, but you have to tell the director. I had to interrupt one of the directors at times. Said, "Sir, Mr. What's his name?" I said, that's not the way they want it. Okay, that's not the way they planned this. So and I mean, he didn't get mad, but he should have been up on the thing. He took over. Is what he did. He was one of those that took over. But Lee wisely counsels in his book. He says there are no rules for a wedding ceremony. The bride's wishes should be honored. She will lean heavily upon the advice of her minister, whether her minister is doing it or not. He is on safe ground defending the bride's wishes. Whatever the bride wants, that's what I always say. If that's what she wants, what she wants. We had a couple that got married, and she wanted to dress up in Western wear. I said, no, wear whatever you want, as long as it's decent. I don't want to be sitting here, you half clothed, but things like that. And I've had some of those. showed up that way. Sometimes I think maybe we ought to look at their wedding dresses before. Put the wedding dress on, take a picture, bring look at it. Thing of it is, it's their wedding, so you let them, especially the one that has the most say so most of the time is the bride, whatever she wants, because most of the time they're the ones that want, say, church wedding, and some of them, like Linda, she wanted a private. She didn't care. She wanted me, wanted her family, her immediate family, and my immediate family, because my sister was a bridesmaid, to be there, and that's it. They didn't want a big thing. And she didn't want this, she didn't want that. Again, because I'd be home for 2 weeks and then I'd have to go back in 2 weeks. She didn't want to be messing around doing a big old wedding. And so, any question on that? Now, again, we had more on that on other things. Also, other opportunities of the preacher. I'm just going to go through this because I want to go on to the other area. Number one, in addition to pulpit preacher, the effective preacher would sometimes be asked to deliver special lectures or speeches such as commencements, baccalaureate, civic or dedication addresses. Now, that's true. You'll be able to do that. I have spoken at like the American Legion because I'm a veteran. But they were most of the time they use preachers, and Jim. I think know if Jim does that. No, he does it. He's in charge of that now. But I've done it 3 or 4 times, and then I've done it up at Kingston, Georgia. They called me on it one time, but I've done probably anywhere from 150 to 300 veterans funerals. And so people knew me, so they would ask me to do those things. And some of the civics clubs, I've done those. And I don't really like to do them, but if it's a member that asks me to do something like that, somebody maybe I can study the Bible with, then I go. I'll say yes. But now veterans things, I usually don't turn them down. Except for Jim. I turned Jim down because he asked me, and I said, well, you can get somebody else, because I've done it a number of times. So, number two, the preacher should evaluate the invitations for spectral lectures or on the basis of the possibility of the speech opening doors for personal evangelism and opportunities to emphasize the importance of spiritual values. I went to a civic place. I'm trying to remember. It's the Optimist Club, but they're very pessimistic. But I went to the reason I say it because they can't get along. They got 2 or 3 of them here in Bartow County. So but I did that, and what I did is I said I did a thing. Will God continue to bless America? And when they found out that I was a preacher, they said, "Oh no, we're going to be here a long time." I said, "No, you're not going to be here a long time." I said, "He told me at least 20 minutes. That's all we're going to do." When I get through saying what I want to say, if I got more to say, I said, "But I'm going to stop at 20 minutes, like that 15 to 20 minutes." So number three, the first decision the preacher must make after accepting the invitation is to select an appropriate subject. And so there are 3 simple tests. The subject fits the speaker if he already knows something about it. If he's interested in special study with subject in order to learn more about it. If he has a resource of information on the subject and he feels strongly about the potential subject. Now, I've never had anyone that I spoke at any of those things to ask me to do a special thing. Now, I was sitting in a tent one night at the Boy Scouts. They'll be there to help them burn the flag. Certain ways you do that, you fold them and put them in a brown paper bag or wrap them up that way with something brown paper bags, what we did. And then you put them in the fire and you burn them. Well, I was sitting in there waiting. It's kind of chilly. And so we're sitting there waiting. And the commander of the Vietnam veterans came in and says, well, they want somebody to speak before we do all of this. And Bobby, you're going to be the speaker. Well, what's Bobby going to speak on? Well, I spoke on the flag. The flag to me stands for freedom, love of country, America, and God. FLAG. I just got up and that's why I talked about those things. And then when there was something else that came up later on that we raised a flag somewhere up in Whites, and they came over and said, Bobby, you need to say something. Make sure you say the same thing you did at the Boy Scout. Well, I can't say the same thing because that's been a long time. I don't remember. But I did. It was at school for young people. But we have to do that. The subject must be selected in light of the occasion. In other words, if you're preaching, if you're going to be there and it's relative to any type of occasion, then And then also you got to look at the level of the audience, the age level, and where they're assembled and so forth. Number four, there are potential problems connected with speeches and special services. The preacher may encounter prejudice club presidents and high school principals. I became a member of the JCs. They ordered to set up a group of that in my first located work. And so they needed a chaplain, but they let it be known right quick they didn't want a preacher as a chaplain. You know, wasn't the chaplain. I was a member. Subject must be lied again on occasion. So you may he should meet prejudice with kindness. And as a preacher, sometimes people say things that are prejudice in reference that of Christianity or prejudice in reference to that what religion, quote, religion you are, that type of thing. The preacher must be too big to let little men upset. That should be upset, not upset. Introduction and presentation of the speaker may pose a problem. I don't know what other people do, because like most of the time I let people know I am not a pastor, I am not a reverend. And I also let them know that that I have a doctorate, but don't call me Dr. Bobby Gate. I said I don't use that. The only time I ever use that is when I write a recommendation for one of our young people to go to a university or go to college. The time that I use it, I mean, there may be other times, but that I had an opportunity to speak at the Georgia downtown at the Georgia congressional building, whatever you want to call it, where the Senate and the representatives meet. And it was in joint together, and we were trying to get them to give us a POW MIA appreciation thing. A letter so we could get the flags to fly on special days, and that the state of Georgia would fly them and so forth. And so we were introduced, and I was introduced. Says he got up and says, "We want everybody here." The senator did, our senator in this area, says, "We want everybody to know in this chamber, these people have done these things." And he went through a list of what we've done in Bartow County, what others have done down in Polk County. They have not asked any of us, any government, group of government, donate any money. These people have raised the money themselves to do all these things, and all they're asking us is what they're going to ask us. So in other words, he says he let them know we weren't there for something. All we wanted to do is get a POWMIA flag flying. So we can do things like that. But we need to make sure they understand, that we're not a pastor or reverend. Even if you do it sometimes, the people at Owens Funeral Home here in Bartow County, I told them the next time they put a pastor or reverend in the newspaper, I was going to get up and announce the Carswell Church of Christ that I would not do another funeral at Owens. I was so tired of them doing that that I told them over and over again not to do that. And then Parnett Jennings, the other funeral home in town, turned right around and he put Dr. Bobby Gate. I pitched the fit with him. I said, "You don't do that." I am just a preacher. That's all I am. So, well, anything on that? What are A, B, C, D, E, F? Number six, the length of time for the speech is very important. So you'll have to figure that out, the minimum and the maximum of it. And if somebody says, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, that's what I do. I do at least 15 minutes, and then I don't go over 20. So if they give it 20 to 30 minutes like that, I'll stop anywhere right before 25 or at 25, because there's no standard. Next one, the preacher should be prepared for the development of unexpected problems. Now, sometimes especially the American Legion, Jim, I don't know if it's still that way but they got it fixed, the public address system. That happened to me too about a couple of times up there, and I had to scream. When I got through with my 12-minute speech, I couldn't hardly talk. But you have to be very careful about that. Also, if you're speaking in an auditorium or a gymnasium or a cafeteria, there's problems going to arise. And there also may be some, the preacher should strive to maintain good humor and self-control when all these things take place. Faithful gospel preacher will not sacrifice his conviction for these invitations to deliver special lecture. I mean, if they say, "I want you to do this," I said, "Well, it will be based on what the Bible says. If you want me to do it, I may not quote the Bible, but it's what the Bible teaches. Like, I let it be known." And but there are a lot of times that even especially when you're speaking to that veterans group, I found that many of them appreciated the reference to that scripture. I, every time I've done it, they've done that. So, also, we find that from what has been said concerning the field of labor for preachers, one might get the impression that the preacher's task is an impossible one because of everything that we've said thus far. The scope of the work makes the preacher's task difficult, but it's not impossible. I mean, like I said, I think when you read Brother Holland's book, he begins and tells you all these things you got to do. You got to study, you got to study, you got to study. You got to do all these things you're supposed to do. You know, the office hours and all that kind of stuff. You need to do this, make sure your classes and all your sermons. He goes through all of that. And then he starts telling us all these other things we got to do. And all of a sudden, when we put all of this together, you know, it's a big quote work. And that's what it is. It's the work and it's the life of the preacher. And in his life, if he doesn't love what he's doing, then he's going to have difficulties in being a preacher. You have to love what you're doing. You know, got its ups, it's got its downs, but we have to love what we do. And so, and then there are many rewards for faithful service. Sometimes now, in reference to when you're doing something, something may come up, like somebody may faint or something like that. And usually, I don't get myself involved in those because they got people there that are supposed to take care of that. Even at services, at church service, we have people that take care of that type of thing. And so you might want to, figure that out with someone. If you're going to be speaking in a place, and you got a large group of people. If it's something happens, what we're going to do, you know, there are many rewards. The preacher who sincerely cares for people and visits with them when they're ill, tries to comfort them when they're in the valley of sorrow, shares with them the joy of seeing their children united in marriage, and one who listens patiently to their problems will find a love, respect, and appreciation that will enrich his life with a sense of service and accomplishment, and will let him know that he's a person of real worth. There's the congregation I went to and preached that they came out of the Baptist church. That was in 1982. I stayed at 1987, nearly 5 years. I like just a couple of weeks having 5 years. And I get things from them all the time, and especially on Facebook. And if I ever compliment something that they do or say, happy birthday, happy anniversary, I'm sorry for your loss, they'll say something, and then sometimes they'll write a note and send it to me and say how much they appreciated me while I was there, things of that sort. It makes me feel good. And I just can't tell them that I'm coming that way. I would say, well, I'm going to Alabama, I'm going to Florida. They say, oh, you're going to come down toward Dothan. I said, because they want us to stop and spend the night somewhere, so we could see them, but we don't do that because that's out of our way where we go in Florida. Then the greatest reward is the blessing and the approval of the one who said, whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Matthew 26:28. And that's basically what we as preachers should be do. We are ministers. We're there to serve. And the Bible has, as we have already pointed out, the Bible points out how it is. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. I wish that when I was in the school of preaching, there was 73 to 75, there wasn't a lot of books on that of counseling that we would use in the school of preaching, and we may have in our sermon designs dealt with preaching a funeral or even doing a wedding, but I can't recall anything about counseling. And what really bothered me is, and it also bothered Keith Mosier. He did this before. He did this publicly. I started doing some of that. But what happened to me is that we had some people that die here. My wife lost her mother in January of 1994. And then she lost her daddy right before Christmas in 1994. Lost her brother 2 years later. But during the whole time, a lot of our members was losing their parents. And so I got up one night and I said, we're not going to study this on a Wednesday night. I said, we're not going to do our regular study. I said, I think we need to talk about grief. And so we talked about grief. And one lady came, and she wasn't married, and she's in her 30s, and her aunt died. And her aunt was like a mother to her, and I knew she died. Come up to me, and she said, "I wish you had done something like this when I lost my aunt." You know, well, I didn't know. I mean, everybody was expressing to her the grief about her grief, and if they could help and things of that sort. And so I figured that maybe this would help. Uh, Instead of us talking about some things we've already talked about, that we would talk about grief recovery. Now we're going to say some things because we're preachers, and we're going, whether we like it or not, you may let the congregation know that you're not a counselor, and but you're going to have people come to you to help them to deal with their loss, whatever the loss may be. Now, when I talk about grief recovery, I'm talking about any loss. I don't know if y'all lost money in the valley out in California. I don't know if y'all lost any money out there, but if you did, it's a loss. And my granddaughter, when she was about 4 years ago, she came home from school, and her little puppy got there with my son. He was here, and he'd been playing with the puppy. And the puppy would always, when he'd come, he would run to the end of the walk there and wait on Ava to get off the bus. When Ava got off the bus, she'd run out. That time she was out there playing with our son, and when the bus came up late, like with her, she took off. She got out in front of the car, was killed in front of our dog. And someone says, "Well, we're going to get her another puppy." And I said, "No, you're not. You're not going to try to replace that dog. She loved that puppy, and you're not going to give her another dog. Not right now. You don't give her, or you don't suggest give her another dog until she says, 'I think I'm ready for a puppy or a dog.'" But they wanted to replace it, and that's what a lot of people do, and that's not really the thing to do. So we're going to talk about that. And if you were to read Psalm 51, maybe we will read that. If you have your Bible close by, I'll pull up my New Testament. My New Testament has Psalms. That's the reason why we use it. I didn't laugh. Y'all must be asleep tonight. I didn't even grin on that one. But my Bible, this one has the Psalms in the back, which I'm glad, because I use this one in funerals. He says there in Psalm 51, listen to David as he writes, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee and thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, and thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear with thou judgest. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest a truth in the inward parts, and in the inward hidden parts thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. Uphold me with thy free spirit. Then will I teach transgressors thy ways, and sinners shall be converted unto thee. Deliver me from blood guilt. So, O God, thou God of my salvation, my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall show thy praise. Thou desirest not sacrifice, else will I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offerings. Sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. God, O God, thou wilt not despise. Do good in thy good pleasures of design. Build thou the walls of Jerusalem. Then shalt thou be pleased with the sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. And then shalt thou offer bullocks upon thy altar. So you see there in reference to David there, that how that he is pointing out some things that's in his life, and truly we can look at his life and we can see some of those things that David had gone through. But it is a good psalm. But just imagine thinking about someone who died, or an ex without feeling brokenhearted. And imagine living and loving to the fullest. So what would that be like for you? Because that's what we see when we see people have a loss. When we talk about grief, we think about that of human being. We don't talk about somebody grieving animal or grieving over the loss of money, the loss of land, the loss of their home, the loss of their car, all these things that are a loss. Every loss brings about grief. You know, I stole your Snickers candy bar and you're going to grieve there for they got your Snickers bar. There are things that we grieve about. And we need to understand in reference to that about grief. Here are some common indicators that you are experiencing unresolved grief. And that's what I call it. Now, the others, as we're going to go through, they call it something else, some other thing. But number one, do you refuse to talk about your loss? Do you avoid thinking about your loved one who died because good memories are painful? In April 1962, my brother and two of my friends, all of us, were friends just about a year apart. He drowned, and we found him 17 days later with one of the fellows, and the other fellow they found 21 days later. I didn't talk to it after it was over. I watched my mother grieve. And I'm talking about I watched her grieve. I get off the school bus, come in the house, my mother would be in tears, sitting in a chair. This picture, things of that sort. She just grieved and grieved, and finally, uh, I would think, well, she's gotten over it, but that wasn't the point. But finally, she worked with her grief. She worked it out within her mind. Do you avoid thinking about your loved ones who die because good memories are painful? Do you avoid places or events that remind you of someone who died? Do you only talk about their positives, refusing to admit that they might have had some negative qualities too? Now, if you want to, when you look at that in the military, post-traumatic stress disorder, this is a big problem. Number 4 there. Do you only talk about their positive? For a person to get over some things that happened in Vietnam, sometimes they have to look at the negative of the people they were with. And that was the thing. A fellow saved my life, but I couldn't look at his negatives. It took me years to look at his negatives. He saved my life, And so it took me years to get over the negatives, the things that he did do that probably would have saved his life. But number 5, do you keep the same exact routine you did when they were still alive because you're afraid you will forget them? In other words, you still do the very same thing. Do you only talk about their negative qualities as if they never did anything good? There should be a positive and a negative. We all have, we all have those. We all have good points. We have bad, and it's just as good to sometimes to look at the negative thing. In other words, something will be said about, well, he really treated his wife terribly, or didn't treat his wife like he should sometimes. And someone will grab says, well, that may be true, but we all have our faults, and we all understand that. But he loved her. See, that's the whole thing. He's not perfect. He wasn't a perfect husband. Well, she wasn't a perfect wife. So you have to realize that. Do keep the same exact routine. So you only talk about those negatives. Number 7 is, do you avoid getting close to people? Unresolved grief is usually the root of fear about new relationships. It took me a long time to connect with people. I lost too many people. I lost too many friends in Vietnam. Therefore, it took me a long time to really trust someone. The only person I trusted is Linda when we got married. She's the only one I would trust. I love my mother. My mother is my hero, but for some reason, it was just her. I knew she loved me, and I knew that she loved me no matter what I did, and so forth. So we look at those things. And when we think about grief, so someone says, well, is it a biblical thing? Well, we find that our Father, our Heavenly Father, in Genesis 6 and verse 6, he grieved over was what they did. Look at what God had done for them, and here he grieved over them. We find also in John chapter 11 when Jesus is dealing with what was his name? Lazarus. John chapter 11, verse 35 and 38. That's right. Lazarus, am I right? I won't say Joseph. It's Lazarus, one of the one that died. He said, I will, right? I bet you could think on it and correct me if I'm wrong. For some reason, it just left. But anyway, in John 11, verse 35, dealing with that of Lazarus, the Bible points out to us he loved him, okay, and he wailed. So he grieved. And see, grief is not a sin. If grief is a sin, if grieving is a sin, then our Lord, he sinned, never sinned. Crises are all around us. This is a time to learn. The journey through life is a series of losses, crises, trauma. In November of 1967, my platoon sergeant come back from Hawaii, been with his wife, and he talked to us. He was leaving us as a platoon sergeant. We got some new platoon sergeant while he was gone. See, we replaced him while he was gone to Hawaii with his own. And he came back. They put him in another platoon, but he came up and he said, I got to talk to all of y'all. And I think I may have told you that. He told us, he says, you only have one life, live it to its fullest. And he says, life is what that stuck with me every day, those things. So there are crises all around. He was killed right after that. If you go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul now, he's dealt with the Corinthians and the problems that they had. And they had all kinds of problems. Now, and they were biblical problems. Now, they had some other problems also that, relationship problems that the Bible would correct eventually. But they had some real problems. And he says to them in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 3 and 4, he says, blessed be God, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now watch what he says, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who, as the God of all comfort, continues to comfort us in all our tribulations, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble by the comfort wherein we ourselves are comforted by God. Because God comforts us, then we'll be able to comfort other people because we know that our comfort came from God. So there are things that we can say and things that we can do to help people. And we read Psalm 51, and I'm not going to spend the time to go back and look at all of that. But if you go back and look at where he says, I was born a sinner, so forth, as they would say in some of the versions of the Bible. But if you'll notice there in Psalm 51, get my Bible open, that he points that out to us, and down in verse 3 and 4. Well, notice he says he knows he's had sin, verses 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And then in verse 5, he says, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Now, if you stop and look there, because of what they did, what was done, they had to wait, what Judah done, they had to wait 10 years, 10 generations, not 10 years, 10 generations, 400 years before anybody from them could go into that of the temple and so forth. And so things of that sort, that was one of the views that people have of that. And I would encourage you to actually study it out for yourself, sit down and read about Psalm 51, verses 1 through 19. It's an expression really of the regret of that of David. And we can almost, when you read that, you can see the tears of David. And he had a ball of grief. He was grieving for what had taken place all the way through his kingdom and so forth. Okay, you're going to learn. If you went to college, you learned this, called Five Stages of Grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That's the book. That was the book. That was the book. It is. She wrote it, and then the others have done some work with it also. But here's why now. I want you to understand that we call this the 5 stages of grief. Now, 5 stages of grief by Miss Ross was dealing with death of a human being. Okay, never forget that. That's what she's dealing with. And so these are the 5 things. They are first, if a person does this, denial. And that means they're in a dazed numbness that is much like the shock reaction of a physical trauma. A refusal to accept the loss. This stages, most people try to return to normal routine and intellectualize loss. I've had to go and knock on people's door and say, go with people and then go myself. Either one have to tell them that their loved one is dead, was killed in an automobile accident, or drowned, or was murdered, things of that sort. And so, and those people say, no, that cannot be. I just talked to them. And even now, it's even worse because we have cell phones and everything like that. And you may just be sitting and talking to someone, and they put the phone down. It's like Linda's niece. She left here. She got a new car and everything here. She left here, and the next day she called and was going to where she was leaving Carrollton and going to Newnan. And on the way over there, she was on a 2-lane road. Had a passing thing, and it ended. And the people didn't let her in, and she hit another car and totaled her car. But we're just thankful they didn't kill her. I mean, she's dying. She doesn't have a 30-something% heart, but she still tries to do things that she can do. She just spent all of her money. She paid cash for it, and they got comprehensive income. And so you never know. And so, in reference to things about that, so when someone tells you that, no, that can't be, and I can understand that. And then the number 2 is anger. Normal and unavoidable reality sets in that often creates much somatic distress. Too many people internalize anger and block the grief process. They're so angry they can't grieve. Especially if somebody has killed somebody, if it's been an accident by somebody, and they have this anger within them and they can't grieve. And so they block the grief process, ended up with guilt, depression, and long-term physical problems. Some people say, well, they're not getting over it. They got to do something. They're not dealing with the grief process. The anger they got within them. And many people will exhibit avoidance and blame others for the loss in this state. In that stage of anger, there comes, when you talk about that, it's what we call survivor's guilt. That of PTSD, we call it survivor's guilt. If I'd been there, he would not have died. Or if I'd been in that car with him, I would not have allowed him to drive because he'd been drinking. If I'd been in that car with him, I should have not. I should have drove the car, or I should have been the one that died. So forth. Then start bargaining. This is what she said. People try to recover the lost person by bargaining with God. In addition, grief is often obsessed with meta questions such as, why, how could you let this happen, God? Why me? Sufferers or may be also trapped in this thing of only thing. Only. That's why we said, if I had been, thinking if only that they had done this or done that, or if I had only said this or said that, something different, in tragedy, Ted Offensive in 1968, we had this fellow come in, and Gary Champion. He said, somebody over here from Cartersville, Georgia. I'm from Cartersville, Georgia. He ran over and grabbed. He said, my name is Gary Chapman, and I'm from let me think, Jasper. He said, I think he said the county, Jasper, Georgia. I said, you are? He said, well, really, and he called out the other little place that he's actually from. And he came back home. When he got home, and I'd already got out of the military, he came home. He found me in Cartersville. He come to see me one night. I was working at a 7-Eleven store. He come to see me one night, and then I didn't see him again until many years passed. He was SD. He had it terrible. Eventually, took his life, and it was because he got angry at his daughter. Took his life. So you stop and think about things like that. How's the daughter and how's the family going to deal with it? Well, then number 4, but they never said. I never heard them say anything about if God, why did God allow this to happen? Number 4 is that comes up is depression. Depression is often mixed with guilt and sometimes anger. During this stage for the bereaved, they will blame themselves for not knowing what they should have done. And so give permission for one to feel the pain of the loss and allow them to agree. It's important for the church family to allow people the luxury of being depressed as they face the loss of a unique person or an opportunity, whatever it may be. Give them the room to grieve. People different grieve. Some people clean up their house. One mother that And they kept saying, "Mama, come do this. Mama, you come in here. Mama, you." And she was in the kitchen cleaning up, and every time somebody bring a dish in, she'd get them in there, she'd wash it, put them on like that. And finally, one of the daughters who knew her very well, knew their mother very, very well. I think it was a daughter-in-law, says, "Look, Mama is working through her group," and that's what she was doing. Yeah. And I always liked the one that I found was that when the people, a lot of people stayed with her, staying with this woman, and she had lost her husband, they lost their father, and everything like that, and they kept staying and staying. And finally, one morning, she got up and they got through eating everything. She says, "Well, I got something I need to say," and they said, "Well, Mama, what you got to what is it you got to say?" She said, "I think it's time for all of y'all to leave." He asked them to leave, let her alone, Then she would deal with what she had to deal with. Then finally, about acceptance, resolving loss by accepting the hurt and the memories, moving on with the focus of what is to come. And that's the way that Miss Ross, that's the way she wrote her book. But she was dealing with that of death, nothing else, death, okay? Death of a human being. And so what we do is that we go about and we tell people, well, let me wait. We're going to have a couple of minutes, and we'll take a break, and we'll come back and start with that. But these are the things that she was saying: is you have denial, you deny that the person has died, you're angry, maybe for all different reasons now, but the anger is there, and then you start bargaining. I can remember when my brother, before we found him, kept saying to God that I said, "God, if you let us find them, they're alive. Let us find them and everything. I'll do whatever you want me to do." But I was bargaining with God. I didn't want to lose my brother and my other two friends either. And then we have depression. Good thing with me, I was just 14 years old and I worked, and that was one of the things. And the people I worked with, they closed the business. It's a restaurant. They never closed. Closed for my brother's my brother and the other two people. They closed for their burial. You know. So then there's depression, then the acceptance, where we had to come to the point of accepting it. And I had a whole summer uh, that happened in April, and I had a whole summer to work with, and so I did pretty good after that. I found another job because I was going to high school, and so I was very interested in what I was doing. Plus, I worked with my brothers, and so they helped me a lot with my depression accepting. Okay. Did I? Yep. We started it. I hope I started this. Did y'all hear that sound? Okay. I'm going to pause for a few minutes. Okay. We got down to B part on our dealing with the preacher and grief. Dealing with grief, I mean, helping other people. And again, like I said, Brother Mosier, he has when he goes around and he lectures, he has classes where he lectures on this. And what I do is I was training people, not training them, but having groups, meeting in congregations. That's where I did mine. I went to school to do that. Went to grief recovery place and did those. And then we had groups and do singles and so forth. And it's more like I could have gone into that business, but I didn't do it for that. My thing is I want to do it for members of the church and use it for a thing of trying to teach people the gospel too. But what happens is that, again, going back to Miss Ross, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression and acceptance is how that she says that we deal with death. And we are told, that is, when we lose someone, we are told, do not feel bad. Now, that's just now in my mind is that tell someone that way, and they start feeling, you're not supposed to feel bad, and then all of a sudden they're feeling bad, they think something's wrong with them. Or the idea is like some of them said about my Ava, my grandchild, getting a new dog because her dog was killed. Replace the loss. That's the reason why a lot of times now you see that if a man or woman loses their mate, that they'll turn right around and they'll marry quickly because that's what they're doing. And sometimes they get in a lot of problems by doing that. And then just leave me alone, let me grieve alone. And that's all right if you can do that, but if you're not going through the process of grieving, and you want to make sure that they understand that. Some people will say, just give it time. Time take care of it. And, I personally would have thought about that, but it took me many, many years to think about all the things that happened to me for 363 days. And so you stop and think about it. It does take time. It just doesn't go away. It never goes away. Everything you got is up here. It's never going to go away. And so then I've heard some say, "Well, Mama, you got to be strong for everybody. We got to be strong for Mama." The kids would say, and the mother would sometimes say, "Well, I got to be strong for the children, especially the grandchildren." And so, but then the other one is keep busy. Like I told you, that one woman, she's cleaning up her house, she's doing everything. She got the next morning and told her kids it's time for them to go home. That's what we're told. Those are things. And there are other things that we're told also. And then you stop and look at them and you say, well, it makes sense. Well, really do they? Saying somebody will say here, like, get a hold of yourself. You got to keep yourself together. And I kind of like, after I went to study grief recovery and everything, I got where I kind of hang around down closer to the coffin and see what people were saying, because I wanted to know what people were saying to people. And says, you can't fall apart. Why can't you? Why can't he fall apart? People express things differently. Some people are very quiet. So forth. Keep a still upper lip. I probably didn't hear that one time, but pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We understand how you feel. Nobody knew how I felt. Nobody knows how you feel. No matter how close you are to your people, maybe your mate, maybe my wife. Linda could say to me when my mother died, because her mother died, I know how you feel, but she didn't tell me. I didn't tell her that when her mama and daddy died, because I didn't know them. I lost my father, but he wasn't a father to me. I mean, I lost my father. I lost my two stepfathers. Both of them died. And the second one, well, both of them were more of a father to me than my real father. But the thing of it is, there it says, people try to understand how we feel. You can't understand how people feel. You know how you feel, and that's the whole thing, is getting the person to know how they feel. So he says, be thankful. Somebody said that they lost a child, so be thankful you have other children. Well, my other children can't replace my child. Can't replace one. The living must go on. Well, that's true. That's not false. We're alive, therefore we need to go on. Then this one here, she is in a better place. Now, that's good to be able to say that. But if you say that to some people, well, why did God take her? Why did God take her? Why did God let them live? So you open up a lot of things there, and so you have to talk to those people in reference. Then number 9, there all things must pass. Number 10, he or she led a full life. If they're older people, and they live a long time, that's a true statement. But what does that do in reference to helping you grieve? And what I would do in reference to that, if I was sitting there and talking to someone, someone said, well, somebody told me, she led a good, full life. I said, well, I would say, come along and say, well, about your loved ones, what type of life did they live? Tell me some of the good things. Because most time, they got things in here they need to get out, and they'll sit there and talk to you. They'll sit there and talk to you the whole session in reference to telling them good things, how their loved one, what they did. I read an obituary. I read an obituary in the newspaper some time ago, and I didn't think I was ever going to get through with that thing. It was like 2 columns, but the children were telling about their loved one, and they said, "Well, Daddy was like this," and then the other one said, "Well, Daddy was like," and they put all of that down in there and put it in the picture. That was great, because they were just praising the things that he did. They said, "Oh, but he took care of us. He meant what he said." Things like that. But God will never give you more than you can handle. You ever heard that? Now, the Bible, that's a biblical thing. You should not be angry with God. When you go back and you look in the Bible, people got angry with God. I mean, and they were righteous people. They got angry with The last one is the one that really woke me up to think about grief. What about me? You're sitting here with me all about me. What am I feeling? How am I going to deal with this? And because I said something to a very good friend of mine, very good friend of mine. I encouraged him to go preach and everything, and he did. He had a beautiful wife, inside and out, and she died. You know, and I'd lost my mother, and my mother wasn't a member of the church. Well, I said something to him about heaven's going to be her home like that. He around looked at me and says, "You're right. What about me?" It made me stop and do a lot of things. What about me? You know, and so that's the same thing that we need to look at. There are also people do the comparison thing, and it robs dignity because you never know how someone else feels. Someone says, "I know how you feel." No, you don't. Don't rob me of that. That's what we do. Then there's the idea of facts and that of myths that people say and do. You know, there are facts. There are facts that can be said about the dead. The person has died, and yet then some people begin to start telling things. Grieving people want and need to be heard, not fixed. Okay, can't fix them. They want you to listen. That's the reason why the last one. Listen with your heart. Have your heart with ears. What piece of your heart for? You got a heart up here. This is your mind. This is your heart right here. It's what they want more than anything else. Just listen. And you have a heart with ears. You just listen. And you'll find that if you practice that, I have some sermons on about the heart. And I preached them. I filled in over at Rockmart after I got better. And I preached a series for them over there about the heart. But you listen with your heart. You have a heart with ears. Those ears are going to listen. Okay, now a lot of those things is things that we would say that are good, but I want to talk to you about grief recovery, and because that's what I do is do the grief recovery, and you can follow the other one that Miss Ross does, or Brother Mosier. He has a combination of things, but and they're teaching now in the school about things like this, dealing with that of grief, because you're going to have to deal with it. If you're going to preach, you're going to deal with it because most people that preach funerals are preachers. Probably 98% of them are preachers. But I deal with what we call grief recovery method. There's a method about this. Grief never ends, but it changes. I always grieve. On the February the 7th, I grieve. On March the 10th, I grieve. And there are other dates, but I have those two that I remember because on February the 7th, the fellow saved my life in Vietnam. And on February the 10th, the fellow took the radio and took my place, and he was shot, completely disabled. But those things. And I stop and think about them. So grief never ends, it changes. And it is a passage that a place is a passage. It's not a place to stay. A person can stay in that of the grieving apart. So the sense of loss must give way if we are to value the life that was lived, Lois Weiss says. Grief is a person's own personal experience. It's something that each of us experience. Grief is unlike, excuse me, other life experiences. Uh, you remember the fellow? What was his name? Starts with an M. Has had his had a TV program. He says, "Don't go out there, Monk." Monk. You ever see the program called Monk? The jungle out there, and it is. It is a jungle out there, really. But the idea there is that there's a lot out there, and a lot of things that happen. The word grief comes from a Latin word meaning to burden. So it is a heavy weight or burden that the person carries. And so what we want them to do is to make that weight lighter. It's never going to go away, but you can make it lighter. And so unresolved grief is almost always about undelivered communications of an emotional nature, In other words, it's something that we haven't resolved in our own mind. And the reason for it is, like I think I've mentioned this before, we ask ourselves, what could I have done more? What could I have done different and more different? And what could I have done more different? More different. Ah, what could I have done better? Better, better, different, and more. BDM. That's the way I'm supposed to remember. Better, different, more. And so we ask ourselves that in reference to that because it's unresolved. And you can resolve it if you ask those three questions. But everybody does that, but they don't follow it all the way through. Time cannot heal an emotional. People say, just give it time. Time cannot heal emotional, but any more than time could be put air back into a flat tire. Go out there and put you got a fat tire out there and just put your pump on it, or you put your air pressure on it and just keep trying to fill it up. You can never do that. And so time, no matter how much time we have here upon the earth, it cannot heal an emotional wound. Feel wound. UND. Okay. And we have that wound. And so that's the reason why, like if you live close to military people or military people go to the congregation and they fought in the wars that we've had, and sometimes it's not even in wars because I know of a lady who was on a ship and there was a sexual problem, and so but she had PTSD because of what happened to her, and so time cannot heal anything like that. It's an emotional wound; it's always going to be there, and there's little things that trigger it, and so a person has to realize that no matter what we try to do, it's always going to be there, and it's on instant recall. Is what I always. And so what happens many times is that people go through. You can take a person like with Linda, her mother died, and her daddy was sick, and she had started. She know she didn't have time to mourn for her mother. She had to start taking care of her daddy, and then he died, and she had to work through both deaths, and then her brother died, and that left her alone. All she had was cousins. I think an aunt, no, an uncle, and aunt. Yeah, she had one uncle and one aunt left. So we put it that way, again. And so the question is what is grief? And grief, we stop and think about it, is at first aid, you call 911. When we see that something has happened, that's what we do. We call 911. And so, like, here's a child that's lost, or here's a person that is sick and they need help, and they die. And so, it is the intensity of the loss, and when we were doing this, do things like that, I think about the death of a human being more than I think about death of anything else, or loss of anything else. But I've seen people that have lost animals because they were close to them, especially older people who've lost their loved ones, and then they lose their animal, their child, their baby, as they call it. Grief is a normal and a natural reaction to significant emotional loss of any kind. You look at Jesus in John chapter 11 with Lazarus. Jesus, he wept. He grieved for him. He loved Lazarus, and therefore what he did was normal. And so it's normal for us. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end or end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. It's like if is there someone out there that you grieve for? It may be someone that we always went to them for to help us with our problems, but they're no longer there. Yeah. Or it may be on the other hand, you have a loss. Well, and you're grieving, and you're grieving because you don't feel like it's a loss because every time you went to that person, they weren't there for you. Yeah. In other words, it's like someone explained that here is a father, and the father was never there. But here is a father who was always there. I'm always here for you. And so there's a difference. And so there's these conflicting feelings. He's like, well, what am I going to do? Well, he wasn't there in person. Different feelings. And so Grief is, like I said, here's the feeling of reaching out for someone who has always been there, only to find when you need them again, they're no longer there. So why do we not train people how to grieve and how to help others grieve? We need to train people to have a heart with ears to make a loss graph to look at the components of that of what we need to do. Now, I know I use myself because I know myself. I know what I had gone through. You notice I put out here apology, forgiveness, significant emotional quotes, completion letter, and goodbye. Those are things that we learn to do to help us with our grief. And that very first one was the hardest thing for me to do because the fellow who saved my life, there are things that we learned. There are things that when I got there, this man taught me. And when I got there, he taught me things about how to survive in Vietnam, in the jungles of Vietnam, and fighting the VCs and the North Vietnamese army. I mean, he taught me these things. He was teaching them to me just about every time I was learning. Then I went on the radio, but I still learned things from him at times. We learn how to do things. I mean, we'd have lieutenants and all these people come over and take, first lieutenants, sometimes second lieutenants would be our platoon leader. And they hadn't been there. And so they'd come in, they'd start doing it and say, whoa, 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 you can't do it that way. We don't do things that way. Here, that might be all right somewhere else, but it is not all right over here. That's not the way we do it. And sometimes they would get mad and they would we do it their way and we get into trouble. They get into trouble, especially with the company commander, but they get in trouble with their soldiers also. And so and it's hard to apologize. So this fellow here, we had ways of doing things. When we went through the jungles, no matter where we went, we had a point man. After the point man, we had the squad leader. After the squad leader, we had a rifleman. After the rifleman, most likely we would either be the radio. I said, let me go back. We had a point man, the squad leader, the radio operator, if they were by themselves, a radio operator with them. If that squad was by themselves, they had a radio. That's the way it worked. And then after that, we would have the rifleman, and after that, we'd have machine gunners, the team. And then somewhere along in there, we'd have a medic go out that way. And then we'd have a couple of people. We've got 10 or 11 of us in there. Usually the squad is 10, and then the RTO, when he came, would be the 11th person. So I was the 11th person, but I was the number 3 person. But on this day, I was the number 2 person. The squad leader, he didn't get a point man. And when he turned around to tell me to get down, they killed him. He'd had a point man, that would have not happened. I mean, that's what I'd say myself. If we had a point man, that wouldn't happen. Or like if I'd been there, that wouldn't have happened. See, I had to, and so I I had to apologize to him. He's dead, but in my mind, I had to apologize. So I'm sorry that I didn't bring it up to your attention that you needed a point man. Especially years later, a fellow come to me and says, I volunteered to be his point man. He told me no. He wasn't going to put anybody else in danger. He's going to do it himself. Well, put me in danger. See, that was the idea. I had to say, I forgive you for putting my life in danger. That's what he did. I got wounded because of a little mistake. Those things are hard. I mean, it's hard if you just stop for a moment to think, say, if you had to apologize to your mother or your father or a brother or your wife or a child, for something they did, or you have to forgive them and that they passed on. You just stop and think about that. So that's what we teach is that you learn how to apologize. Somebody says, "Well, how do you apologize if they passed on?" You go to the cemetery if you want to, or you sit down and just think about the people, or you hold a picture in your hand. There's ways of doing things. Forgiveness and also the significant emotional quotes. There are things that people would say, and then the completion letters where you write a letter and then you finally say goodbye. Now, someone told me it'd be hard for me to say goodbye. Well, you say goodbye when you call mama or daddy or your wife or your husband or your child on the radio. You talk. I mean, on an RT on the radio. You call them on the phone and you talk about. Okay, I'll see you later. Goodbye. What does that mean? That means you're never going to see them again. Never going to talk to them again. It means you're never going to think about them again when you say goodbye because they passed away. No. See, the thing of it is, we want to think that a person is trying to get you to just forget the whole thing. The person never exists. No, we want you to work through it, and there's a way of working through things. One of the best things you can do for your child is make sure you are emotionally complete with any past losses in your life. Yeah. I can listen to my wife talk to our children, our grandchildren when they lost their friends, and so forth, especially with children. And we would talk to them about those things they need to know. Any questions are coming? I have to look at the time. I want to finish this, but there are all different types of losses. And again, Ross's book is dealing with the death of a human being. That's the reason why that we say there's other ways of looking at things. We want people to work through grief, especially a Christian. We want a Christian to be able to work through grief. When I went to this school and got certified with them, and when I had my classes, I was really surprised at people that wanted to come to the class, and I could only have so many people in class. So I ended up having to have two classes, and then others came on a personal basis. The personal was easier because I take about an hour every day that somebody could come. But then all of a sudden, people would come to the congregations to really do it. And I didn't want to travel because that is every week for 10 weeks. I think now they cut it down, but the way they do it, they cut it down to about 6. That's about what I was doing. But there are different types. The single most off limits topic in the English speaking world is grief or the reaction to a loss. That's off limits. We don't talk about that. In other words, if they have had a loss and you go see them and you want to know things about the loss, or you want to see if you can say something, are you going to make it better or are you going to make it worse? Let the person, reason why you have a heart with ears. Listen to them. How are you doing? You know, and let them talk. And they may say, "Well, I'm doing just fine." You know what fine means? You know what fine means? Feelings inside, not expressed. F-I-N-E. Feelings inside, not expressed. And so I usually say, if they say that, I say, "Well, you ought to be great." Get in real egos and temperaments. You need to get really go to trouble. I have thanks for that all the way. Someone asked me the other day, says, you're getting older. You need to act your age. I think something about my age. And I said, well, I'm just okay. An old kid always young. But the thing of it is that here, these people, our people, our members of the church, needs to realize about things. And so there are some things that's off limits, therefore, in our speaking language, but we need to make sure that we can understand that this person is grieving. And therefore, if they need to talk, I'm going to listen for them. So the type of loss as they talk to us is not interesting when a person talks about that, or is it? If we're asking or we're there to listen to them, then we ought to show interest. Why is it we do not talk about grief? Why don't we talk about it? What we're going through? We as Christians, we should grieve over people who we teach the gospel to and they don't obey, or we should grieve over those people we talk the gospel to and they obey, but they're not faithful. Do we grieve over them? Yeah. Death of a beloved one. How many of us have lost someone in the last 5 years? That's the question that we ask when we go through our class. How many have you lost? How many of us are prepared for the death of a loved one, especially an unexpected death? You ever talk to your mate about dying? And have you made any kind of arrangement? My wife and I have planned our departure from this world to the next world, and nobody can change it. It's in like a little contract. We got fixed up. We got to do just the way we want it. Our children don't have to do anything to go down and say, we got to do this. No, we go down there and hear my father or my mother passed away. Y'all want to have the funeral. Tell us how it's going to be. So we fix it for ourselves. That's what we want it to be. But anyway, this idea that some people say, well, I know how you feel. And again, like I said, all relationships are unique. You ever stopped and thought about that relationship? And we talk about James, John, and Peter, right? We talk about the closeness that they had in reference to being the close to the Lord, especially John and Peter or so. And those relationships were unique, and especially when you get down to the point when Jesus says there to the thief on the cross, "Today thou be with me in paradise." He says, "Father, forgive them first. Today thou be with me in paradise." And then the next one saying is, "Behold, my mother." Tells my understanding is he looked. We always say John. He looks over to the disciple, whoever it may be. I would say John. "Behold, my mother," and all he was asking him was take care. And so we receive that in reference to this idea. I know how you feel. Relationships are unique. Lost relationships, uh, there is loneliness that a person has, especially if it's a husband and wife and they're elderly and they're by themselves. I think I told you that my brother lost his wife, and over a year he met someone else. Met someone met her before, had known them for years, but actually kind of friendly with them for after, but near that year after she passed away, and now they're dating and so forth. But loss of the relationship, so a person becomes lonely. So one of the children asked me about that, and I said, "Well, what would you do if you lost your husband? Would you be lonely? Would you try to find someone like a friend? I wish you just a friend to him too, not that they're thinking about marriage, but." The idea, they also there's no trust. When a person says, "So this idea, I know how you feel." Well, our relationship is unique. Am I supposed to trust you with what I have inside me? Um, and it's a real hurt. Again, when you read John chapter 11, there you need to in verse 1 and see this relationship that Jesus, Mary, and Martha and Lazarus had. They had a great relationship. And we're not told. I sometimes wonder, in John 21 and verse 25, that if all the things Jesus done was written, the world wouldn't have no book. Sometimes there are areas where I wish where there had been more things revealed. That's one of them there with this relationship that Jesus had with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, because he said, "I loved him." The love that he had for them. In John 14 and verse 1, we have to realize that Jesus, not your heart be troubled, you believe in God, but also in my house or many mansions. Not so, I would have told you. I go to a prayer place for you. If I go into a prayer place for you, I'll come back. Say John 3. So the idea is that we're moving our friends behind when we leave, and we're leaving our children. And so people will say, because again, these relationships are unique, and we find this idea of that, like with Jesus, with that of Judas. I trusted you, and so look at Judas. How much trust did Jesus put in Jesus? Matthew 10 and Matthew 17, Matthew 20, 24. How he betrayed our Lord. Look at the trust that Jesus put him. He's the one that had the bag. The trust that was there. And Jesus knew what was going on because he was in one's heart unto in verse 25. But then there are times when people have a loss in that of God. One begins to trust in themselves; they do not trust God. Second Corinthians 1 and verse 9. God's one's going to comfort, and it is comforting. I think it's really something over in Colossians chapter 1 that's somewhere around the latter part there. I think it is talks about the word. Let the word of God dwell in you richly. That's in Colossians 3, but I'm thinking about Colossians chapter 1, that reference to how the word of God gives us strength. And not only does it give us that strength, but we find that the trust that we can have there, that he gives us the strength to overcome. And not on that, but we notice he gives us the comfort through that of the scriptures. And even though that our loved one, they were a faithful member of the church, I mean, it's still a loss. But yeah, we're going to see them later, but it's still a loss. You have to stop thinking, it's still a loss. And so, then also when a person loses, there's a financial loss. When I pass away, if I pass away before my wife Linda does, then her benefits from the VA will be cut into about 60%. She will get 38 to 40% of what we're getting. Then well, she'll get all my Social Security, and she'll be all right. I hope they'll be all right. Our children are plan on taking care of us, especially our grandchildren. So, okay, but then there are typical responses associated with that of grief. If a person is grieving, this is things that you'll see with them, and these are things that I saw with many of my Vietnam veteran friends when we had in 1997, we started a group and we had a counseling program deal with what we went through, post-traumatic stress disorder. We had counseling for that. And so, and these are some of the things that a person does when you're grieving. And that's what we have done. Our basically, a lot of times in people's life, we start out in life and there's no grief, and all of a sudden we lose stuff. And on there, and like with us in war, someone is wounded, so we're grieving. Someone is killed, so we're grieving. And on and on and on and on and on and on. And our grieving part, because all these losses that we've had, they grow up like a stack of pancakes. They always try to say, you got one pancake on top of another. You haven't dealt with any of them. And that's what happens when a person does not deal with some of the issues that they face. And we as Christians ought to help our fellow Christians, especially to deal with the things that they're going through in life when they're grieving that way. In any way that we can help them. Again, like I said, the best thing a person can do is not to offer advice, just let them listen to what they have to say. And then what I tell people when I do counseling is you listen to one another. I remember in the marriage counseling one time, the woman kept telling, and the man didn't get it. Finally, she just says, I just want him to tell me something. And so he turned right around to her and told her what she wanted to hear. But he meant it. I mean, he tried to say it in other ways, but he wasn't blunt with it. Like she wanted him to be very blunt with what she wanted to hear. And so, but then we can stop sometimes and listen to people go through with how those heart with ears and listen to everything that they go through, and then we can, we can make some comments. But all they really want you to do is listen. Now, if they want some comments, they say, "Well, what do you think I ought to do?" But they'll ask. And again, remember, what they have said, and stay with the lines of what they say that are bothering them. Don't just. But typical responses associated with grief is reduced in concentration, sense of numbness. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about self numbness and you can't feel. I'm talking about the whole part of your numb. Your brain is numb. Disrupted sleeping patterns. A lot of times people have quicker bedtimes, but when they lose someone, that gets all mixed up. And when it does, that's a problem with the body also. And so changing of eating habits. You have a roller coaster of emotional energy. There are over 43 losses that are considered grief. Over 40. Death, divorce. Can you imagine that going through a divorce and somebody walked up and said, "Know how you feel? I went through a divorce." They don't know how you feel, you know, because you may have been the one that loved your wife, loved that your wife loved you. That type. And so death, you have divorce, even retirement. I hated it. I had to retire because of my health at the time. Then I got better, and then I said, well, maybe I shouldn't have retired, especially since I wasn't forced to retire. Even moving. Most people don't realize. Now, I didn't realize this how much this idea of grief that my children went through when we moved from one congregation to another. And in one place where we left, I should have stayed there. My children were happy, and then one place we moved, they were happy there, and then we moved back to Carter. We were in Welb, Alabama, and they just loved everybody there, and everybody loved them. They just loved, it was just great people. It was out in the country. We moved to the city of Conyers, and they had to make all those adjustments, and everything was set for our children for high school, and we up and moved to Carter. And it really hurt them by doing that. So also the loss of pets, I mentioned that, financial change. What am I going to do, especially, if the breadwinner loses their job or they pass away? Loss of health, have these problems, cancer. Here's the idea, can you imagine? And during the COVID, not only was there problems with that, they were grieving because they couldn't get outside. Even kids were having problems. You have legal problems. You have some people go through the empty nest syndrome, the end of addition, start into school, start into college. Here are some intangible examples of grief: is lost trust. Uh, when we do the counseling in either individual, especially in that of groups, people will talk more so about this trust because of some of them had been married before, and there was this idea of trust. There have been problems within the marriage, and they rebuild the trust to keep their marriage. And then not only loss of trust, but loss of safety, loss of control, loss of faith, loss of fertility. And you look at all of those, they're intangible examples of that grief. Women, because they can no longer have children. And I have a granddaughter right now. They have one child. They told her that if she's going to have a child, she says, if you're going to have another child, you need to have it now. And before she found out anything, she couldn't even talk to her. She was depressed. She went to work, her child, and so forth. So people go through those. Grief is individual and unique. No two people grieve alike. And it's like one fella and his wife. The wife had a miscarriage, and he was pretty good to her for about a couple of weeks. And then she was all upset one time, and he just jumped up and told her to her face, "You just got to get over it." How can you tell a mother you just got to get over it? Yeah. But that's what he did. You got to get over it. Grief is individual. He worked through it, but she had not worked through that. She lost it. Now, grief cannot be neatly categorized. Now, again, Elizabeth Kubler Ross works on a death and dying. What she works on, not grieving. She has it all planned out, things to reference. When you come and hear that somebody has died, here's the 6 things you're going to go through. And you may skip one or two, but you're going to go through all of those. But that's not with every time things happen to you. You're not going to grieve that same way. And you're not going to deal that same way because you can deal with grief. She is very specific about this distinction in her books. If you read them, yet the media and universities have attached her work to the grief. And this common misfortune has confused and hurt many grievers throughout the years. Because we have to realize that one thing, that all relationships are unique. They're not alike. And so she does not do that in her books. Matter of fact, I listened just recently. Something happened on TV, and I was flipping through like I do. I what I want to watch. And all of a sudden, I stopped on the news, and I heard them make mention of, they didn't accept that. They were talking about somebody dying, and they went 2 or 3 of those points of this wall brought up. Okay, very quickly, we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and the reason I do that is because of more and more study has been done on what people are going through when they face that of trauma. And I try to tell people, like I said earlier, that as a veteran, it's like a pancake thing. Our stuff was pancake. I could sit down and tell you about all the people that were wounded and died. A lot of them are listed in the book that I wrote, and I could do all of that. And you could see I never had time to breathe, never. It took me from February the 7th to the month of April to tell my family what happened on February. I just didn't talk to anybody. I changed everything in my life because of that. And so we have to realize now that people go through trauma. My granddaughter, when she saw her little puppy killed, she went through a trauma. So we have to realize that. And so we never know that we are preaching, maybe we're teaching a Bible class, especially we're teaching Bible classes of different ages. And some of those people may be, things are going on in their life. They may be being bullied. Somebody here late recently was at Walmart and they was taking up or wanted to sign up for bullying or do something with that. I said, no. I said, I can't do that because I'm a bully. Like that. And they all kind of laughed. They said, well, and I said, no, I understand it. I know, I understand it. I wouldn't joke. I said, but I understand it's not a joking thing. But over the past 38 years, a variety of words have been popularly decided to describe grief. Okay. One word that has recently made the headlines is that word trauma. Language is important, so we are going to clarify our take on the word. Trauma is an event. Post-traumatic stress, trauma, is an event. It can be any event that causes psychological, physical, emotional, or mental harm, such as death or abuse. We would say a death, we understand that, but abuse. I know of a woman who was pregnant with a child, and when she knew her husband was coming home, that had been drinking, pregnant, ready to have that baby, crawled up on the top of a dresser, one of those closed dressers thing, you open out like this. She climbed up on the top of it and hid from him. She didn't want him to. And so that's very traumatic. So we have to understand in reference to trauma. It's not just because we were in a war that we have PTSD. A person who goes through anything, abuse of any kind, it's a trauma to them. Again, like I said, we're talking about psychological, physical, emotional, and mental harm. So whether you want to call the event trauma or a loss is okay, but the result of a trauma event is grief. And grief is a natural and a normal response to any loss, no matter what the loss may be. You ever stop for a moment and think how valuable things are? You read the parable of the lost soul, the lost coin, the lost pearl. Go over and read those and see how those things are, what they would do to just to find that which was lost. And so anything that we lose, anything that we grieving over, it's a loss. It is the conflicted emotional that results in the end or change in a familiar pattern or behavior. Grief is the feeling of wishing things would have ended different, better, or more. There are three words. Grief is the normal and natural feelings after a trauma. What more could I have done? What could I have done better? What could I have done different? I hear it all the time when I talk to people that have lost. I love to hear it when someone says to someone else, they walk up to them and they say something. I really appreciate how you took care of your mother, your father, your husband, or your wife, or your child, or uncle so and so, or aunt so. That's what you did for them. And they're basically telling them how they feel in reference to how these people treated somebody in whom they love, and that this person was grieving. This person here was using the positive sides of that to try to encourage that person that was grieving. Although, now, if you want to stop me, you can stop me. Although no two people grieve the same, there are some common responses grievers might experience, such as an overwhelming sense of numbness. Remember, Miss Ross brought that out. Changing in sleeping or eating patterns and wishing things ended different. Oh, if it could ended different. Oh, if I would have. I was on R&R and my machine gunner got killed when I was gone, and I said, "Oh, I've been there. I can't change time." That was one of the things that makes people say, "Look, I know you're saying these things that things that you could have done differently and better, and all these things that you can say to yourself that I could have done this better, this different." And what was the other? But the idea is that you look at all those things that you think about, and as that of a person that's going through something like this, then there are different responses that's going to take place. We're wishing, some of them were wishing they had done some things differently, and that if they had done certain things differently, the end results would. But see, that's assuming something, and you can't go back and change the past. And that's the hardest things to get people to stop and think. If you're going to do things better, differently, and more to a person, then you do it while they're alive, so that you can say, I did everything that I possibly could for them. So trauma can be extremely emotional loss event, which ultimately is a grieving experience. And if you see your dog be hit by a car, the event will most definitely be described as a traumatic. Solution, however, is the same solution as a griever who lost anything. You still go through the same thing. The griever has to get to completeness with that relationship with that animal, just like they would have to that of a human being or whatever loss it may be. You still got to come to completeness. A person loses. I guess those people out in California, they're going to get $250,000. My understanding, I haven't listened to all of that, but the idea is can you imagine? Many of them had a bunch of money and they lost all that money. What are you going to do? I lost all my money. What am I going to do? You know. But the thing of it is, when they look at that, they're going to grieve in reference to the loss, just like anybody else will grieve about any other loss. But the thing of it is, they're only going to get $250,000. Now, if that's all they're going to get, that's all they're going to get. They got to make the adjustments in their lives. So here's a few examples. Sexual abuse. I wanted to let you know this. Matter of fact, I looked this up. Sexual abuse. According to the United States Department of Justice Nation Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS, there is an average of 237,868 victims aged 12 or older of sexual assault each year. That does not include children. It is a horrifying, devastating, and painful thing for anyone to experience. Many people associate assault as being traumatic, do not associate it with grief. However, if you stop and think about it, is it not a loss? Here's a woman who was raped, and because she was raped, she lost her virginity. While she was raped, it's such a trauma to her that she could never have children. So just stop and think about it. So there's the loss of trust, whether it is trust from the person who harmed themselves or from trust of any future relationship. All right. Also, it's a loss of control of one's body, and it's a loss of safety. And so these people are going to grieve, but many times they don't look at it. Sexual abuse is they grieve because of abuse. They have to be dealt with in reference to it. I mean, we need to help them in reference to that. Then another one is suicide. I'll never forget this. I had a black friend, and I met him many, many years ago when I came back from Vietnam and got out of the Army. He came into our 7-Eleven place store that I was working with my brother, and he was one of the football players, but he worked on the corner service station. Back then, everybody knows what service stations are. Well, Jason don't know what service station, but we know what service station are. You put your car in, they do everything. Wash it, check your oil and everything. They did everything. And so he worked there. And so when we moved back to Cartersville, we opened up a paint store selling. My wife couldn't find a job. We opened up an automobile paint selling supplies, and we did very well. And but he had a stroke. He came in, and I couldn't understand anything he would say. I finally got on who wanted me to mix him some silver paint. I finally got, but then I kept looking at him. I kept saying, I know this. I know it. And I asked him, we started talking about it. I told him where I worked when I came back from the Army. He said, I used to go there all the time, every night. And I said, yeah, you came with. And I called the people's name that he came in with. So he remembered. We got real close. He rented a house. Or my father-in-law had a house, and when he died, we got the house. And so he rented the house from us. And he lost his, when he had a stroke, he was 39 years old. He worked 40 hours for Union Carbide, 20 hours for Walmart, 20 hours Kmart every week, 8 hours a week. At 8, so he could, provide for his wife and their 2 children. And he had to have open heart surgery. When he had open heart surgery, they took him back to the room. He had a stroke. She brought the 2 children to see him. He left him there by himself. Those 2. And they called in a psychiatrist and talked to him. And they, I said, yeah, if you've never been to a psychiatrist, it's a good thing. Not a good thing you had been. I mean, a good thing to go and listen to what they have to say, what they ask you. So one of the questions asked, he says, all them guys' name says, have you ever thought about taking your own life? Now remember, he can't talk, but I'm gonna talk plain. It's hard for him to talk. He said, "No, I love myself too much to do it." You know, that stuck with me every time I would go to a VA counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist. They asked me that question. I said, "No, I love myself too much to do that." And I learned that from him. He's dead now. He died of a heart attack. So. But suicide is awful shocking for survivors. I've had many of my friends, Vietnam friends, that have killed them. But that does not mean you cannot recover. You might miss your friend or who died, or wish you could have been done something different to save him or her. And that is grief. You're grieving. It is harmful to mislabel grief as a trauma because it is not accurate. If you misdiagnose, you mistreat. Go to the doctor and he says, "Oh, no, you got a virus and antibiotics is not going to work." Well, what if you got bacteria infection? It's diagnosed. Well, you're going to have to suffer. So trauma turns a griever into a victim, and victims cannot feel better unless someone else takes an action. And so our method of doing things, and I'm not trying to sell the method, I just use it once, but I use everything that they have there. That's what they call it. You can look it up online. You can buy the book and you go through it yourself. You don't have to get someone. All you do is buy the book. Grief recovery method gets to the core of grief so the griever can go on to lead a happy and healthy life. Now here's a chart that I use. 2 to 3 years, 75% of people that die, that lose their loved ones, uh, the loved ones that are left back are told different things. 15 years, about 95%. They tell them some things like the words that go to them is don't feel bad, replace the laws, grief alone, just take time, be strong, others, and stay busy. That's what they're told. 75% to 95% of people that lose their loved one or lose something, have a loss. But what are we trying to do? Now, in my work as a preacher and as a counselor, what I try to do is try to help myself, to train myself to be able to meet people, try to help them, their body physically and mentally, so that I could help them spiritually. If we got the way that we could help somebody spiritually in reference to because here they are grieving, then we ought to use that. If you want to go back to Mitch Ross, or if you have your own way of come to your own way of doing it, like with me, I use some of the things that are in grief recovery method, but all my stuff has to be in my mind because when I went to Troy University to get a degree in my graduate degree in counseling psychology, uh, when I got through with all that stuff, I had to go ahead and filter it all out, help me do it from a biblical standpoint. That's the reason why I like the idea that you are what you think. Robert in the book of Proverbs, man, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is it. That's what you are. If you sit back and think of yourself, as a crook or as a whatever, that I'm not a good person. I'm not a good person. That's what you think. That's what you're going to react. I don't react that way, so I try to change their thinking, and I have to change their thinking in reference to about grief. What people are saying to you in reference to this. Oh, don't feel bad, but Bobby, I feel bad. Yeah. Oh well, they're telling me that I need to go out and find me another mate. I don't want another mate, so I have to listen to all of that. And so, if they're going to find a mate, then I'm going to have to tell them you got to find one. Because what the Bible teaches. So you can see that grief support is not the same as grief recovery. We have people that call grief for support. Using our method allows you to have fond remembers, not turn painful, and help you retake a happy and productive place in your own life. When I do funerals, I end up my funerals like this, especially if I know the person and the family. I end up like this. You need to think of the good memories that this person brought in your life. Good memories. Yeah, he wasn't perfect, but you think of the good memories. Think of the times that you laughed. We got together one time, our Vietnam veteran group got together, and we're just sitting there and we started talking, and all of a sudden here we are, 15 people that's been in a counseling class for about 5 years, and here we are, we're sitting talking, and all of a sudden somebody says something, I feel something funny. And everybody started talking and laughing and tears coming to her eyes. One of our fellows went home and walked in the door, and his wife, she says, "Why did you go out and start drinking?" And he says, "I haven't drunk a drop." You can't tell that. There's a fuss. He says, "No, we've been sitting over there telling funny things." Now, can you imagine? I mean, all of us in there were combat veterans, and we had lost people. But here we went home, and we felt good because of the thing that we know that was funny in a war zone. We need to help people in reference to that. No one likes to feel sad, so they do what people are, and so they pretend that they're okay. Find people and that they're pretend they're okay. I say tell people that I'm fine. I tell people that I'm good. I tell people that I'm okay. But if they, because I don't want to say I'm just spill my guts out to somebody all the time. I mean, and I'm right. I'm fine. It's like the elder asked me, said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "What can I do?" I said, "They've told me what's happening to me, and therefore, I accept it. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go." And so I have people to tell me that. I need to talk to you. And then before we get through talking and everything, and if maybe weeks goes by, they'll say, I'm ready to go, but I just want to get some of this stuff cleared up here in this mind of mine. So as we grieve and complete the events and behaviors of our past, we become open to the ability to be happy. I'm a happy person. Any of y'all classmates know what classmates is? It's a group of people. They're trying to get me to do that. Well, I watched there and I looked on. They said so many people told me that I was a very happy type person. I said, I think they're just trying to get me to pay them, $10 or whatever, for me to go say who said that about me in my high school. But the thing of it is, I took it as a great thing. So as we grieve, we complete the events. Happiness means that who and what you are is just, I am just, no matter if I have all these feelings inside me, I have all these things that come up on me that's happened in the past that can bring me grief and to bring stir up my post-traumatic stressors. I have my anniversary days. I have all just like anybody else. But why should I allow the past to guide my life? See? And so, but we have to help people. Thank God. Thank you, God, for not giving up on me. And any thoughts or comments? You have minutes left. Anything? Yeah, I'm gonna stop. Don't leave me. Okay.